The Mersh and Trita Parsi.
Look at the situation that Trump is in. He is facing abject defeat. I mean, we could
This
put
is goat
lipstick
talk.
on a pig. But
This is total goat talk. Oh my God. All my goats in one place. Trita Parsi and the Mersh. Oh my God. The Mersh and Trita Parsi. What the
what you could do in that regard. He lost. This was a colossal blunder. And really what's going on here is whether or not he is going to accept defeat.
Mersheimer, please, I'm begging you to come on the broadcast. I love you. Please, please, you are my goat. How do I not have a single student of his in my chat? How is this even remotely possible that I haven't had one student of the Mersh go up to him and be like, Mr. Mersh, we really would like for you to collaborate with Hasan Abi Piker.
And Trump is only, 10, 12 days away from having to go to Beijing for a summit with Xi. And he's going to arrive there deeply, deeply embarrassed, or he should be, if this is not resolved by then.
Would he have any leverage with China, John?
Would Trump have any leverage with China?
Well, China needs the free access to all the transport through the Strait of Hormuz, correct?
I don't think, Tom, he needs leverage with China. I think the Chinese want to end this as quickly as possible. I think almost every country on the planet, except for Israel, wants to end this one as quickly as possible.
I realize that, but he might be thinking he'd put pressure on Beijing to put pressure on the mullahs.
What kind of pressure could America place on China, especially right now? America is already maximally pressured out on their own due to their own actions. What could America do right now to apply pressure to Beijing?
He doesn't even have to do that. Beijing is putting pressure on the mullahs, and it put pressure on Pakistan. There's no question about that. But the fact is the Iranians are not going to give in to the Chinese any more than they're going to give in to the Americans. The Iranians face an existential threat. They don't have many friends in the world, and they're not going to let the Chinese pressure them into a situation where they're at a disadvantage vis-a-vis to genocidal acts.
Trita told me that wasn't the case, by the way. So there's actually a disagreement here. I don't know if he'll advance that or not. But I asked this exact same question to Trita, if you guys recall, where I said, do you think that the Chinese are applying pressure to Iran? And do you think Iran will listen to the pressure by the Chinese? And Trita said, I don't think that Chinese are applying pressure to Iran. I think they're staying out of it.
Adversaries, one known as Israel and the other known as the United States. Just not going to let that happen.
Well, that brings
Can I ask something?
Well, I was going to say
something.
Yep.
I think it's also important to note that the relationship between Iran and China is not one in which the Chinese easily or happily would put pressure. They would have their negotiations with the Iranians and try to get something, but not using the type of a coercive approach that now unfortunately has become standard for the United States. What is happening right now is that the Iranians are building and reopening a bunch of different landlines through Pakistan and other countries through Central Asia to reach China. And this is done in collaboration with the Chinese. The Chinese announced just yesterday that they're not going to accept any interdiction by American ships in the Indian Ocean of Chinese ships carrying Iranian oil. Which is a much harsher pushback from the Chinese on this than we've ever seen before.
I emailed him for you. Hello, as a fan of Hasan Abi Piker, who's one of the biggest and most vocal fans of the Mersh, I am reaching out in hopes of aiding in uniting these two titans. Hasan has endlessly expressed his admiration for Professor Mersheimer and says he dreams of having his goat on his broadcast. Thank you for your attention to this matter, a concerned fan. He's never going to come on now. Oh, cook, dude. What a ridiculous situation. I'm never meeting him now. What have you done, man?
So I think you're seeing a toughening position by the Chinese vis-a-vis the U.S. And behind the scenes, I'm sure they're having some tough conversations with the Iranians. But that one is nevertheless more collaborative and kind of solutions-oriented than what we saw from the Chinese, just pushing straight back against any idea that the U.S. would be able to take any of their ships.
And yet, meanwhile, Trita, it's been reported that Tehran's put forward this three-phase proposal. You've called it a grand bargain. Tell us more.
So this is a
Grand
proposal that has
bargain.
been reported in a couple of outlets. Some elements of it, I also mentioned in my Substack post, I didn't find entirely convincing. So I don't think the entire package is necessarily accurate, but I think it probably carries the contours of what the Iranians have put forward. It would be a three-phase proposal. What was really striking, first of all, it is that the Iranians really are looking for not an end to the hostilities, not an end to, not just a cease.
Exotic blue-eyed blonde. Don't worry, Hossie. I'll just send him a titty pic to make up for that crazy message. Do not do any of this. Oh my God. Stop.
Fire, not even an end to
What
the
the
war, looking for an end to the US-Iran conflict of 47 years.
What the hell is wrong with all
They're
of you?
looking to make sure that there's not only a non-aggression pact, but also something that is embodied in international mechanisms to ensure that the war doesn't restart, which suggests that this had to
The goat Mersheimer is happily married to his wife,
be codified at a minimum
Madam Professor Mersheimer.
in a UN Security Council resolution, and that they want the Chinese and the Russians to be guarantors of it. When you look at the language that was released. Interestingly enough, they're putting an end to the war at the very first phase. The reason I thought that was interesting is because if that happens, then in the next phase, when they're supposed to negotiate the nuclear deal, the Iranians don't have that much leverage. They have their nuclear assets. But we've seen that the nuclear assets are no longer sufficient to compel the US to give any major concessions to the Iranians. So I suspect that the reason why they put that in the first part is potentially because it's a concession to the Chinese and Asian countries.
What about the uranium enrichment, though?
So on the Iranian enrichment, that's the part that I found most unconvincing. For instance, it said that it would be either downblending or giving up the 60%. I think giving up the 60% is probably unlikely. Downblending is what it was supposed to happen in the Geneva proposal that Trump didn't accept, even though he should have. They're saying a moratorium of enrichment for 15 years. I find that unlikely. I can see a scenario in the Geneva proposal. The Iranians essentially, together with the Omanis, agreed on this idea that they would only enrich uranium for specific needs.
How do you think the China meeting goes? Like, what are the outcomes in your assessment? I don't think the China meeting happens. I might be wrong about this, but if Donald Trump goes to China right now, he's fucked. With the way that the situation has unfolded, especially when he did this hasty military operation again, where he's escalating against Iran and Iran is escalating, following America up the escalation ladder. This is an unbelievably bad scenario for the United States of America in the Beijing summit. I don't think that it's going to happen. It's 10 days. Yeah. Trump has 10 more days until his scheduled visit to Beijing. It's supposed to happen in 10 days on May 14th. He could either cancel the visit for a second time, which would make it seem like he's completely lost control over the situation, and really, as I talked to Trita as well about this, really frustrate the Chinese, because remember, they already hit, they were supposed to do this, and they already hit an extension on it. Okay, so he can't even cancel twice, because it's a really bad situation. If he pisses off the Chinese one more time, I mean they're always in favor of stability, but it's an admission that America has lost control over the Strait of Hormuz. I don't even know what the he's planning on doing here. It will make it seem like he's completely lost control of the situation, or arrive and be subject to a situation where he is pressured over the continued closure of the strait, which will wind up becoming the dominating issue in the talks alongside Taiwan. Trump now would want to turn the Iran page as quickly as possible, said Wu Xinbo, a foreign policy advisory committee member in the Chinese foreign ministry. If the U.S. had gained an upper hand, Trump would have much stronger leverage. This is what I said as well, if you recall, for the past month or so. But now it's clear the U.S. simply couldn't handle Iran. So in a sense, when it comes to negotiations with China, its relative bargaining position has been weakened. Yes, Trump wanted to go into China with two cards in his hand, Venezuela and Iran. This would have given Donald Trump tremendous leverage over the negotiations with Beijing. It didn't happen. It happened in Venezuela with relative ease, but it didn't happen in Iran at all because Iran was like, "F off, we're fighting back." And the thing is, Venezuela and Iran packed up would give Trump leverage, right? But it still would not have evened the playing field against China. There's also that as well. Venezuela also turned out to be a nothing burger, nothing changed. No, what are you talking about? No, it's a huge ordeal. No, you're so wrong about this. Venezuela was China's entry point into Latin America. Venezuela is a huge deal. We're like, you mean nothing changed as in like Delcy Rodriguez is in charge? Who gives a f? It doesn't matter. Delcy Rodriguez is now a loyal and reliable asset to American interests. So that is a tremendous amount of leverage that, I mean, it's not a tremendous amount of leverage necessarily over China, but like it gives an upper hand to the United States of America. It's a card that the United States of America now holds over the Chinese. Meant for the Venezuelans in general, yeah, that doesn't matter. We're talking about states negotiating with one another. We're talking about diplomacy. The little guy is not even secondary in this conversation. Like the ordinary Venezuelans and their experiences have never been a part of this calculation from America's perspective. America doesn't give a shit about that. This is the exact same thing that I tried to explain with Ukraine, right? America has never given a shit about what happens to average Ukrainians.
We haven't lost one soldier in the Ukraine. We spent less than 5% of our military budget. 50% of the Russian army has been destroyed by the Ukrainians. They would be at Crimea already if the administration hadn't been so slow in giving weapons.
It's more so state versus state maneuvering here. Whenever I say this, by the way, people get very frustrated. I've said this in the past about Ukraine, and people have gotten really upset with me for saying this. It's up to you to believe whether or not America is actually invested in the liberation of Ukraine, but America is not invested in the liberation of Ukraine, as America has made it very clear, right? What's your evidence for Delcy being a U.S. asset? Genuinely asking, I don't know, her statements that she has released in the aftermath of the attempted White House correspondents' dinner assassination could give you an immediate inclination into where she stands. I know that a lot of people want to act as though she's like, totally independent here, but that's not the case. Yeah, she's not sending oil to Cuba, for example. Venezuela had a relationship with Russia. Venezuela had a relationship with China. Venezuela is now sending oil to Israel. Like, what are we talking about? Venezuela is not only sending oil to Israel, but also all the oil revenues are going through the American Treasury. You know that, right? Does that mean U.S. is cooking the books? U.S. is taking a percentage of all the oil revenues of Venezuela right now. Like, they are currently doing that. That is what's going on. That's why Chris Wright was in Venezuela recently. So, yes, Venezuela is now a total vassal to U.S. interests. They also seized a bunch of Venezuelan gold as well in a way that, in a manner not dissimilar to Iraq. When we invaded Iraq, they're doing the exact same thing to Venezuela, except it was a much cleaner operation in comparison to a permanent military occupation of Iraq for like 12 plus years. So that's what's going on. Venezuelan oil will be refined in Venezuelan refineries that were previously owned and operated by American corporations, as was the case before the nationalization initiatives. It is basically, so much for the Bolivarian Revolution. Sad to see. Oh no, they have wound back many of the gains in terms of autonomy that the Bolivarian Revolution had. We did that. And that's a big deal. That is leverage over China. Now, China might not think that it's like that significant. Clearly they don't. Clearly they don't consider that to be that important. But if they had gone in with control over the strait, eliminating Iran, or having a pliant puppet regime control Iran in a way that's not dissimilar to Venezuela, then that would be consequential for sure, because China's energy needs are met through the Strait of Hormuz. Sure, they get a lot of their energy needs from Russia as well, but a big chunk of that still comes from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and a smaller percentage of that, up to 10%, comes from Iran. 10% of Chinese oil and gas is coming from Iran. Meanwhile, that's like upwards of 80% of all of the oil and gas that Iran sells. So Iran is in a position where they are greatly invested in not pissing off China. Whereas for China, I mean, 10% is still pretty significant, but the much more significant aspect of this relationship is if Iran was no longer sovereign and had a puppet state in charge of Iran, there would no longer be any sort of America could basically control the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, that's a huge deal for China. Now, I don't think America would piss off China regardless. Like, that's why I'm saying America would have leverage in this negotiations process against China, because China has export controls that they can deploy on the United States of America and render its entire national security and its entire industry ineffective. If you go to the table with China and you have Iran and Venezuela, then you can at least threaten China back when China says, hey, we might do export controls if you do something silly. But given the Strait of Hormuz part of that bargain failed spectacularly, and it failed in a way where America basically showed its ass, I don't even think the summit will happen.
The US stock market remains surprisingly bullish. So they'd say to you, why can't Trump simply ride out this storm? John?
Well, oil prices, food prices, and assorted other prices really matter enormously here. And inflation is picking up ahead of steam. And what you're going to have eventually in the West is stagflation, because you're going to have to raise interest rates to deal with inflation. And when you raise interest rates, you're going to slow down growth. And you want to remember that the economic consequences of the February 28th decision are just beginning to bite now. Yeah. They're cascading their way through the system. And if you listen to people in Europe talk about the future of fuel prices for aircraft and so forth and so on, you listen to the British talk about servicing their debt, there is big trouble coming. And everybody knows that. And the Asian economies have already felt that, as you know, as an Australian. So this is only going to get worse with the passage of time. And that's why Trump wants to end this as quickly as possible. But the key question is whether the Iranians are going to throw up their hands. That's what President Trump, the Wall Street Journal, and others are betting on.
Yes.
That's going to happen. And I'd be willing to bet a lot of money that's not going to happen. And I'd like them to show me a historical example involving a war of this sort, where massive punishment was inflicted on a society, and the leadership then threw up its hands. You just don't find any evidence of that.
Well, can I just add one other thing, Tom, as well, which I think is really important? The two clocks ticking right now is not whether the U.S. economy is going to collapse before the Iranian economy collapses. That's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
It's whether the economic pain in the U.S. is going to translate into a political crisis for Trump.
Something to always consider that I bring up all the time is the Palestinians, for example, can withstand a lot more pain and punishment as opposed to like regular Israeli society. And the same thing goes between the United States of America and Iran. The Iranian economy has already had to exist outside of the global marketplaces because of America's sanctions regime. So their regular day-to-day existence, even before this war, was much more resilient than the Americans are. Americans are used to never having any inflationary shocks. So for that reason, the Iranian runway is a lot longer than the American one.
So it sounds like Trump, according to you, Trita, is damned if he does and damned if he doesn't, because he's trapped. John?
No, actually, only reason he's trapped is because he keeps on taking Israel's advice. If he just goes out of that and he negotiates based on what he says should be the case, America first, we would be in a much, much better situation than we're right now. He didn't care about enrichment before. He only cared about nuclear weapons. He shifted that position to the Israeli position, and then that kind of put him in a corner on the nuclear question. He can unlock that again, go back and say, I'm preventing an Iranian nuclear weapon, but I can tolerate 3.67% enriched uranium, just as the previous JCPOA did, or they could actually go below that. But nevertheless, he's not going for zero enrichment. There's a lot of things he can do.
Yeah, let me put this question to John and then get your response, Trita, because I think this is important about the Israel issue. surely there's an issue beyond this, which is dignity and honor, credibility and prestige, which matters a lot to any American president. And especially the way that Donald Trump.
Donald Trump is an Israeli cum rag at this point. I don't know if there's any dignified exit for Trump, no matter what happens. What dignity remains for Donald Trump? I don't even think he can maintain dignity at this point, ever again.
Let me make 2 points. One is a minor point, and the goal here was to do away completely with Iran's nuclear enrichment capability. So whether you put limits on it for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years is largely irrelevant to that point.
Yes,
Their nuclear enrichment capability is going to remain intact.
exactly.
So just to reinforce what you said, Tom,
Yes!
he fails across the board. And what you have to add to that is that the Iranians, who did not control the strait on February 27 and have a toll booth in it, now control the strait and have a toll booth in it that they don't intend to give up. Furthermore, we had all these.
My dream is to laugh it up with the goat Scheimer like this, just yucking it up, okay, laughing away.
These fancy military bases in the region on February 27th, and almost all of them have been either badly damaged or destroyed. So if you sort of look at the situation that Trump is in, he is facing abject defeat. I mean, we could put lipstick on a pig, but there were limits to what you could do in that regard. He lost. And really what's going on here is whether or not he is going to accept defeat and try and dress it up as much as he can as a partial victory. But he has not achieved, and he is not going to achieve any of the goals that he declared on February 27th or before. And furthermore, he's lost on a number of other important dimensions as well. A colossal defeat.
Trina.
John is absolutely right. I would just add one thing. He can still spin it into a victory if he strikes a deal. He manages to get the Iranians to give things that they were putting on the table in Geneva that would make it a deal that is stronger than the JCPOA. He lifts sanctions. He opens up the Iranian economy to American companies for the first time in 47 years. This is the largest economy that will have been opened up since the fall of the Soviet Union. It will dramatically benefit the American middle class and manufacturing industry. And he will focus all of his tweets and Truth Social posts and everything else on that aspect. And the American public, by and large, will mostly care about that. And the Washington foreign policy elite will mostly focus on everything John said. And he's absolutely right on all of those points. It's an utter defeat. But for Trump, the former of being able to say that he did all of these things and open up the economy and benefits American businesses is going to be his only message. He'll talk about it over and over again. He'll make up some stuff about it. He's changed the regime in Iran or whatever. No one believes that, but that's fine. But he can still turn this around because he's Trump, because he has that capability. Any other president, it would not even be a consideration or an option for him to even think about this.
To the extent that Trina is right, John, how would...
No, the only thing that's different about Donald Trump, and we did talk about this, by the way, Truda and I talked about this as well, and I agree with this assessment at least. The American Treasury never released sanctions against American companies, but they released sanctions against European companies. Donald Trump is invested in releasing sanctions against America as well. That's a huge deal, and that is something that the Trump administration would do. That is something that Trump would do. No other president would be willing to do that. Like Barack Obama wasn't willing to do that, and he would not do that for the JCPOA. But Trump would, because that would, and I mean this seriously, that would mean having a Trump Tower in Tehran. And I'm not joking when I say this, okay? Please understand, I'm not joking when I say this. That is a huge sweetener for this deal. That literally is not a joke. That is a literal reason as to why Donald Trump would actually think about releasing the American sanctions on Iran. Iran knows this, just as everybody else in the region knows this reality. And that is precisely the reason why, regardless of how aggressively Trump is behaving like a servile little piggy for Israel, that is the only option that the Iranians have.
Trump's intellectual supporters on Iran, the Defense of Democracies Foundation, the Brett Stevens of the world.
Yeah. Will it happen though? No.
And not to mention Israel. How would they respond?
Well, the point is that the story that Trita was just telling explains why we should have had good relations with Iran a long time ago. I would argue starting in the mid-1990s, the time was right for rapprochement, and we and the Iranians both would have benefited greatly from having good relations. The idea that Iran is a meaningful threat to the United States is not a serious argument. But then the question is, why didn't we have good relations? And the answer is because of Israel and the lobby here in the United States. And the problem that Trump faces is if he tries to cut a deal and he tries to spin it along the lines that Trita was outlining, what he's going to run into is a real buzzsaw called Israel and the lobby. And this gets to your question, Tom. Of course, those people, in the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Wall Street Journal, and so forth and so on, and Israel itself, of course, are going to be beside themselves. They're not going to know what to do. This is going to be the end of the world for them. And by the way, Trita's also right. There's nobody who could spin his way out of a situation like this better than Donald Trump. Yeah. I don't think that for one second. He's a genius.
Yeah, but he has said consistently throughout this war period, especially since February 28, that if Iran had a nuclear weapon, the whole world would be held hostage. And he's doing something now with Iran that other nations and other presidents should have done long ago. And there is a widespread view that Iran should not develop a nuclear weapon. So Trump would have support beyond Israel. Trita.
Well, if there is a deal that actually is stronger than the JCPOA, then no, he will not have support beyond opposition beyond Israel, because every country in the world, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel, supported the JCPOA. It was passed in the Security Council 15-0. So if he gets a deal that actually has those nuclear components, which he could have done on February 24th or whatever it was, when that meeting was held in Geneva, by the Omanis, then he would have had this. So, and there would have been no objections from any country except for Israel and the Emiratis. Even the Saudis at this point will not.
Yep. And that would be the biggest problem, though, wouldn't it? And that's why we didn't get that.
So it's bad enough for the Israelis that the war is over. The idea that the U.S. would lift sanctions would be totally unacceptable. But here's where there actually may be a unique opportunity for Trump to do it without having to face at least that level of opposition from the Israelis. Bibi Netanyahu is going to have an election in Israel sometime between July and October of this year. He has failed to translate support for war in Israel, which is very strong, into a political plus within the politics of the country at this point. He's fighting for his freedom, frankly, because he's likely going to be jailed if he loses the elections. And on top of that, Trump remains very, very...
Met Gala is on, and it reminded me of your worst take ever defending it, because Awesome Real is straight out of the Hunger Games. In a just world, a Met Gala would not have to do these like extravagant, these attempts to like fundraise by having some of the super wealthy people, but it would be just funded by the public. I'm not in favor of the Met Gala, especially as Jeff Bezos being like the head, the lead executive. But if you think that I'm going to be anti-art, anti-the Met, you're insane. I don't know if you know this, but my mother is an art history professor. Okay. And fashion is, whether many chatters in here want to admit it or not, doesn't matter. Fashion is a part of art. It's a part of artistic expression.
Netanyahu cannot afford to be at loggerheads with Trump. He cannot fight Trump tooth and nail during this period. If he does, Trump could, if he wanted to, go and tell Netanyahu that either Israel or its supporters in Washington need to back off. Otherwise, I'm going to throw my weight behind Naftali Bennett or something of that kind. And that could actually, so the degree of vulnerability the Israeli prime minister has against Trump in the next couple of months is actually at a record level. Whether Trump chooses to use that to actually get a deal that would be really good for America is a different story. But I agree fully with John. Of course, under normal circumstances, this would be so intimidating that most American presidents wouldn't even try to do it.